Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Apples and Genos Fantasy Hockey Podcast. My name is Nate Groot Niblink. I'm the creator of Apples and Genos, originator of the Zero G Draft Strategy. And in this podcast, I am going to go over the most puzzling players league wide as submitted by the Apples and Genos Discord server. And I'm going to do it with a guest. Let's get it. Welcome in, everybody, to another edition of Puzzling Players. I've got a guest this week. I thought that I would vary things up. Maybe people are getting sick of my voice and my voice alone here. And so I've got Jason Chen here with me. Jason, how's it going tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. I always, I always hate doing it on heavy Monday nights though, because I feel like I'm gonna talk about some players, and then as soon as I give a take, they're gonna go out and do the exact opposite in the game that goes on, and I'm gonna just look like a total idiot. But these are the hazards of the profession, I think, Jason.
Yeah, for sure. I hear you on that one. I'm gonna be keeping my eye on some scores.
Yeah.
We were discussing some games right before we came on, and there's some interesting things going on.
Yeah, not the least of which Tampa Bay up 5-1 on Colorado after one period.
Yeah.
That's a rough one. Colorado still not figuring things out in goals so far. Well, let's not waste any time. Let's jump into some of these players. I got a good list going here, and we'll kind of ping pong back and forth on these and give our takes here. Top of the list, the most requested player this week was Timo Meier. Has been a pretty popular choice for this segment throughout the last number of weeks. Just one goal in his last 5 games here, about 16 and a half minutes average time on ice. The underlying metrics here are looking pretty hot from an individual standpoint. First in the league in shots per 60 through these last 5 games, and fourth in individual scoring chances, 4 per 60. A little bit further down in the on ice stats, the team level stats, 73rd, Corsi 4 per 60, and 98th, and scoring chances, 4 per 60. Talk to me a little bit about Timo Meier, Jason. Obviously, he had a stint on the top power play. We got pretty excited about the high end potential here, but it kind of seems like they've moved a different direction. How are you viewing Timo Meier's potential rest of the season at this point?
I still really like Timo Meier. I think there's like lulls he goes through every season. Like if you think back to last season, he had 1 goal in October, 4 goals in 14 games in December, 0 goals in January, and then he pops off in March.
Yeah.
I'm not concerned because the shot volume is there. The IPP maybe is a little concerning because I know the Devils just switched up that line, and I know Nason draws a lot of attention as well. But overall, like I, I I'm pretty confident that Meier will find his way to like 30 goals by the end of the season.
Yeah, it's hard. It's honestly hard to imagine a scenario in which he doesn't get to 30 goals if this kind of shot volume keeps up. It's been pretty intense. And it's not like the minutes are bad, right? Like we were
No.
hoping for more probably than the
Mm-hmm.
16 and a half that he's been getting lately, but it's not like Nikolai Ehlers territory from years past where it was like 13-minute nights and you're just pulling your hair out. So we haven't quite descended to those depths just yet. So yeah, I'm in a place where, I'm adjusting expectations at least as long as he's on the second power play unit, which at this point you have to think is kind of indefinite. They're kind of in a holding pattern there at the moment. But I definitely think like he's on a 25 goal, 50 point pace on the season, but he's shooting just 9.7%. The on ice shooting percentage, 9.1%. I think both of those have a chance to come back up a little bit. And so I do think that you're probably looking at a guy who should clear 30 goals, 60 points on the season, at least as a point pace from this point onward, right?
Yep.
And then there's always a potential if he does go back on top power play, then you get that extra boost, and you could be looking at a guy who actually wins you your league come the home stretch and come the playoffs. So, yeah, still got a lot of love for Timo Meier. It has been rough rostering him the last little bit, but I do think that there are some signs that brighter days are ahead there. All right, we got some comments. Let's get to some of these. PB Stars in here. Timo Meier, LFG, also saying, late posting in Discord, Kevin Fiala needs some A&G mojo. Please bless him with your thoughts. I'm not sure exactly how to make that happen, but we can try our best here. Let's put Kevin Fiala in the sheet here and see what he's been up to the last 5 games. Just 1 assist there, over 17 minutes, 158th shots per 60, 128th individual scoring chances, 4 per 60, 31st in on ice Corsi, 4 per 60, 148th on ice scoring chances, 4 per 60. Yeah, Fiala is a guy like, I feel like we have seen him be on the quote unquote third line in LA, but like, I don't know if there is honestly a third line in LA. It's kind of been a top nine situation there and been like that for multiple years at this point. How do you feel about Kevin Fiala at this point? Jason, are you worried about this recent kind of cold stretch, or you still think that we got a guy here who can at least clear like a 70-point pace, say, moving forward?
70-point pace is possible for sure. I think we should note that Kevin Fiala is a notoriously slow starter. So
Mm-hmm.
in his career splits, he's minus 23 in October and plus in every other month, which is just hilarious. Minus 23 plus in every other month.
That's wild.
But I'm with you on the Kings. It's kind of hard to figure out who exactly to roster on that team, especially given the fact that I think LA internally hasn't been too happy with his play. He was scratched for that one game where I think he missed a team meeting or something like that.
Yeah.
And I mean, he definitely has that point per game potential, but
Mm-hmm.
if you're averaging, 17 minutes a game, kind of bumping up and down, I think it's really hard to do. He's still a valuable fantasy player, especially with the shot volume that he gets. But I'd say like 60, 70 points is his max right now.
Fair enough. Yeah, I just feel like Kevin Fiala is going to be one of those guys cold right now, but you know that he's going to have that pop off stretch where for like a month he's like the first star of the month or something, and
Yeah.
then he goes
Yeah.
nuclear, and then you're going to be kicking yourself afterwards. So, yeah, it's tough at this moment, but yeah, the underlying stats are not terrible for sure, and that
Mhm.
gives me a little bit of hope. It's not definitely not as good as Meyer, who just picked up an assist here in this game that's ongoing against the Predators, by the way. So some live updates as we go here, I guess. But yeah, I'm still relatively in on Fiala, but yeah, it may not be quite as good as, like maybe where I had him in my off-season projections heading into the season. I think that's definitely possible that maybe we're a little bit bullish on what he could be this year. Steve Lorini is pumped that Jason's in here, as am I. He also asked, tell us about Blake Coleman. You got him in Caufield too. Tell us why we should be still holding. Throw Blake Coleman in here. Yeah, I have him in Cupful. I'm in Tier 1, which is a 16-team league this year. And so obviously the calculus is a little bit different there when you're playing against the best of the best fantasy managers, and all of the guys that you could possibly think to stream are already rostered by the time you go to look for them on the waiver wire. So Blake Coleman has been a guy that I've held all season so far. Just 1 goal in his last 16 and a half minutes time on ice. The metrics are usually pretty good for Coleman. They've come down a little bit in this last stretch here, 180th shots per 60, 146th individual scoring chances, 4 per 60, about the same in the all nice stuff there. Overall, Coleman is still just a guy, like, if your league has any weight for hits and blocks and shots, and if your league relatively values the peripheral categories at a decent clip, then Coleman is always going to be doing just enough of that stuff to make him rosterable, at least as a streamer level player. And then, yeah, for me personally, in a 16-team league, I think he's still a holdable player. Tell me what you think about Blake Coleman. Is he more than a streamer level player? Let's take a 12-team league. Do you think he's streamer level? Do you think he's below that at this point? Where are you at on Blake Coleman, Jason?
12 team would depend on the categories, but 16
Sure.
teams, he's definitely a hold. What pops out to me now is his shooting percentage. It's well below what it should be right now. But he offers, a decent amount of hits. He still gets shots on goal. I know that Calgary lineup gets jumbled around a lot, and he was far more consistent last year, I found. But I still like Coleman. I mean, it's hard to find guys who can hit and score goals like him. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
maybe we won't see him score, 30. I highly doubt that anyway, coming into this season. But it's early, so if he goes on like, a 4 or 5 game goal streak, he's back on pace for 20 something goals, right?
Right. Yeah. I'm in consensus there. Alex asks, Besser, Garland, Doc, and Elias Lindholm are available on waivers. Who should I pick up for this week? What do you think, Jason?
This one's pretty easy. I think it's Besser.
Yep, I would consider that a slam
He's
dunk
expected to
as
play
well.
tomorrow, by the way.
Yes, yeah, I did see that come through today as
Yeah.
well. Chris says I traded Meier and Dorofiev for JT Miller. Tell me I'll be okay. Yeah, what do you think about what's going on? You're closer to the Vancouver side of things there, Jason. What do you think about JT Miller? You got any idea on what to expect there moving forward?
Not sure. I mean, we know Miller's not like joining the team on this current road trip that they have.
Yeah.
I did watch, I think it was the first or second game where he took that one face off and then he didn't take any more. So I do believe he's playing hurt. Whether that's related to the things he's going through now, I don't know. In any trade in fantasy hockey, I tend to think that the best player, the guy who gets the best player, wins. So I do like JT Miller again. The injury risk is a little concerning, but if he comes back, that's a pretty good offensive team on the Canucks.
Yeah, generally, I think the trade is good. Obviously, there's risk there just because we don't know exactly what JT Miller's effect might be with that
Yeah.
injury moving forward. But that's a swing that I'm willing to take, basically, to try to get the best player every time. I'm pretty willing to make that kind of deal. Lucas asks, would you trade, I'm going to say that's Nicas, for Wyatt and Marchessault, Wyatt Johnson and Jonathan Marchessault? Myself, I don't think I'd make that move. Just with how spread out Dallas is, I really like Wyatt Johnson. He's still continued to look pretty good under the hood for me in the metrics that I'm looking at. But obviously, Nicas is popping off right now. I think if I am trading Nicas, and I think it's worth investigating what you can get for Nicas at this point with the crazy start that he's had. I'm not saying don't at least ask around and see what you might be able to get, but I think I would aim higher. What about you, Jason?
I would too, unless the person you're trading with already knows that Natchez might come down. The kind of interesting thing about that is Marchessault. So he had that really rough start at 5-on-5. The Preds are terrible at 5-on-5, but he's starting to score a bit more at 5-on-5. But Natchez being this hot, it's so hard to give up, right?
Right.
And you watch him play, and he's getting more ice time, and it's just, even if he comes down a little bit, I still feel like he'll score at a higher or similar pace to Wyatt, and certainly better than Marchessault.
Yeah, I think that's a fair take at this point, given what we've seen on the season so far. Michael says, just want to say, love you boys. Thanks so much for the best hockey content on YouTube. #0G. Thanks for that. Armin says, what up? Two top Gs, Nate and Jason. Good to see you. Blister
Nice.
Boy asks, what to do with Peterka? JJ Peterka, obviously everybody's favorite sleeper coming into the season. I think everybody who had a fantasy hockey podcast had to say something about JJ Peterka coming into the season this year, and rightfully so. But he has gone a little bit quiet here the last bit. 2 assists, no goals his last 5. Still close to 19 minutes average time on ice. 219th shots per 60, 181st individual scoring chances for per 60. The shot attempts are still there, 54th in the league in shot attempts per 60 over the last 5 games. On ice stats are mediocre. What do you think about JJ Peterka? What do you think about his rest of season outlook here? And should we be trying to move off of Peterka? Should we be seeing if we can, kind of sell high on what hype there might still be here? Or do you think he's going to rebound?
So the concerning thing to me here is the lack of shot volume. I think he's had 3 0-shot games over the past little while. I'd still hold on to him if I have the roster space, just because I think he's missing Tage Thompson a lot right now. And Tage, I know, is coming back soon. So I'd hold on to him. If there was someone else on the waiver wire who is like in a similar top 6 role, that might get better on ice stats in terms of shots or anything like that, I consider moving off Peterka. In shallow leagues, I definitely would think about it. But if you're in a deeper league, I'd just wait.
Fair enough. All right, next one, Dirty Deeds. Hi, Nate, could you share your thoughts on Bo Horvat, please? We could definitely do Bo Horvat. Horvat has 2 assists. I scrolled too far. 2 assists, no goals, similar to Peterka in the last 20 minutes a night there. Actually, pretty similar stats under the hood to to JJ Peterka over the last little bit. Obviously, Bo Horvat's role there is pretty locked up with the
Mhm.
Islanders. They have him, and they have Brock Nelson, they have Noah Dobson, and it kind of feels like there's not much else beyond that at this moment, especially with Matt Barzal out of the picture for the time being. So, what do you think, Jason? Bo Horvat, can he be more than just like a bottom of your lineup kind of guy while Barzal is out?
That's it. Like he's missing Matt Barzal too much.
Yeah.
And not like Barzal was setting the world on fire, but I think with him in the lineup and Duclair too, that offense is just a little more dynamic. The Islanders are a team I don't really like rostering in fantasy just because it's such a low upside offense. But if you have shots and faceoffs in your league, Bo's still like really valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point, especially in a face-offs league. You got to take that into account with Bo Horvat. That's one of his claims to fame for sure.
Yeah, I mean his line mates are Anders Lee and Pajot. Like how good can
Yeah,
you be? You
yeah.
know?
Even if you get hot, how long does it last, right?
Exactly, right?
Yeah. Armin asks, are we dropping Chinakhov for Voronkov? So Voronkov was on that top line with Monahan and Marchenko, and also on the top power play with Monahan, Marchenko, and Kent Johnston. So yeah, I think it's an interesting question. Chinakhov obviously had a hot start here, but in this last game he was playing with Olivier and Sillinger. That's definitely not quite as good as the Monahan Marchenko treatment that Voronkov's currently getting. And Voronkov does have some good underlying metrics. Blake and I talked about Voronkov in the flagship show that just came out yesterday. So yeah, I think that Voronkov for me is the guy you'd prefer to roster right now, with the huge caveat that these lines could change at any moment, and then I'd probably switch my answer. So I don't know how you feel about that, Jason.
100% the same.
Yeah,
Other than Marchenko and Monahan and Werenski and Johnson, this lineup is too hard to predict.
yeah.
Because Chinakhov and Voronkov, I think Chinakhov is probably the more talented player, but each of these two guys could pop off at any time, right?
Yeah, agree with that. Toronto Dave's in here. Hashtag 0G. Good to see you, man. Michael Rowland, Justin Faulk, a potential hold now with the coaching change. Is there still hope for our boy? We could throw Justin Faulk in there. I've been talking about Faulk because he's in the middle of, I forget what he's at now. It's like a 13 game pointless streak or something ridiculous. But the underlying stats have still like been pretty good. He's been shooting, he's been hitting, he's been blocking, he's been doing everything except for putting points on the board. And you got to think that at some point, the pucks start going in again, at least to some degree. And he's still been hanging on to the top power play role. For myself, Folk is still a hold based on the underlying numbers. And I mean, it depends who's out there. It always depends who's out there for you to pick up, right? Like if it's an 8-team league, yeah, there's probably somebody out there that I'd rather have than Justin Folk. But in 12-team and above, I think you're probably better off hanging on to Folk. What's your thought on that, Jason? That specific situation, and then maybe just more generally, when a player gets into a massive cold streak like we're seeing with Folk right now, do you try to drop them and just like forget about it until they start to rebound a little bit on the score sheet, or are you willing to hang on to them if everything else around them's still looking okay?
I think the coaching change will do a lot of good. It helps that basically coincides with the return of Robert Thomas, who helps that offense. I don't think it was really fair to Drew Bannister that the offense struggled when you're missing your top player. The interesting part about Falk is that his kind of cold streak dates back to last season. I know he had a really good preseason, and that's why I was high on him. But
Mm-hmm.
you go back the past 80 something games, his shooting percentage is like half of what it should be. As far as like whether he's a hold or not, like you said, it depends on who's out there.
Mm-hmm.
It's tough to predict. I tend to think the Blues are a low upside offensive team. And for a power play quarterback, I don't know. I almost want to go with like a power play specialist over Falk, unless you need the peripherals, right?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a case to be made there for some of the other defenseman that might be out there. I saw Emil Andre, some
Yes,
people's favorite. He's got a goal in the game here against Vegas, so he's getting on the board. That's good to see.
I love Emil Andre.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. I'm excited about Andre. I'm also very desperately trying to remember that John Tortorella is his coach and that this is probably going to go away as soon as like tomorrow. But yeah, definitely excited about the talent that's on display there in this last little stretch. Armin says, in Deep League, who are you going for between Romanov, Matt Roy, and Gavrikov? Romanov is actually not playing tonight with an illness, which is a fun fact that I learned by virtue of having streamed him in for this week and finding out after the game started that he was not playing. So
That's tough.
that's super fun for me. But yeah, I think all these guys are relatively decent options. Romanov, probably the biggest hits and blocks among those guys. Matt Roy might have a little bit more offensive potential than the other two. Yeah, I don't think I have a major lean one way or the other between all these guys. It's more about which categories you'd be wanting to target for me. What do you think, Jason?
Yeah, same. I'd probably lean Matt Roy over Romanov just because I like the Caps a bit more.
Sure.
We just talked about the Isles' lack of offense, so you're not going to get power play from any of these guys.
Yeah. Armin also asked, drop Drouin, concerned re-injured the same concussion this year, can add Vimelka, Mrazek, or use a streamer spot. Cats League, other goalies are Skinner and Demko. Yeah, I'm not sure. I saw that Drouin wasn't playing tonight, but I didn't see anything more concrete about the injury there. So if it is, yeah, like a concussion thing and we're thinking it's a continuation of stuff that's gone on there, then you would obviously expect that he'd miss some time. And at that point, I'd be obviously okay to drop him. If it's more of just a one game thing, then you might want to still hang on. But I do like Mrazek. He's been playing really well as of late. The Blackhawks have not, but Mrazek has. I don't know. I think I would be willing to make the drop and go to Mrazek. What are your thoughts, Jason? Anything sticking out to you there?
Well, I mean, if his goalies are Skinner and Demko so far this year, he's a bit of trouble right now.
Yeah.
But actually, I should point out Vimelka's been excellent past three games, including that back-to-back. Mrazek definitely has more long-term value because I don't think Ingram's going to be out for long.
Yeah.
Depends on how your league is set up. If you're looking for saves, Mrazek is really good for that. If it emphasizes more wins and a good save percentage, then maybe not. But between the two goalies, I probably say Mrazek is the way to go.
Yeah.
Utah's too inconsistent for me, and they're missing too many bodies still on that defense.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a big concern for sure with how things have gone there as of late. So, yeah, I share that concern for sure.
Yeah, but maybe you can get Utah on like on an upswing just because they're so streaky.
Yep. Yeah, that's definitely a possibility as well. Armin noting, Chinakhov practiced online with Fantilli and Johnson today. Power play 2. That is a good spot. I like that. But yeah, Voronkov's still on the top power play and the top line. So sticking to my previous take there. Lister Boy, McTavish, Drouin, Monahan, Voronkov available for Peterka. Oh, so potentially trading Peterka for one of those. What do you think, Jason? Would you make that deal?
I love Monahan.
It's a strong case, especially as of late. I think he's got like 9 points in his last 5 games or something crazy like that. Yeah,
really good shot volume.
Yeah.
Really good deployment. Out of all those guys, Monahan's the one guy I would say he's going to be a number one guy all season.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think for myself, I'm probably holding on to Peterka over all those guys at the moment. I want to see what it's like when Tage is back.
Yeah, fair.
For myself personally, and then maybe table this until I've seen, like 3 games after Tage is back, and then make that decision if I still can. Yeah, it feels a little bit like buying high on Monahan as well, which I don't always love, but you can't always have your cake and eat it too, so I understand that as well. Chris says, would you drop Faulk to activate Vince Dunn at the end of the week? I'd be keeping Zellweger over Faulk as well. Yeah, that's that's probably a move I'd make. It's hard for me to really parse what's going on there with the Seattle power play. Like Brandon Montour, they have still kind of split the forward units, but Brandon Montour has taken by far the most minutes on the back end. Like in the last game, they pretty much evenly split the power play, it looked like. But Montour had 4 minutes 19 seconds to Riker Evans 1 minute 12. So it was pretty. It's been like that for a while, where Montour is just dominating the power play share, even if the forward units are rotating. So yeah, if Vince Dunn comes back and immediately kind of levels things out with Montour, then I think you're going to be happy to drop Faulk for Vince Dunn, because I do think Vince Dunn is actually a pretty efficient player, and he doesn't have to have like a big power play share to give you a decent production. That being said, if Montour hangs on to this big time power play share that he's been getting as of late while Dunn has been out, then I think you're probably gonna potentially anyway, assuming Faulk can get things going under Montgomery, you might be kicking yourself. So yeah, it is a little bit of just what you think is going to happen, I think, in Seattle after Dunn comes back. What do you think, Jason?
Yeah, I definitely think I'm with you. I like Vince Dunn. It is a little hard to say because he's only played 4 games this
Yeah.
year. And in the first 3 games, he didn't actually play a heck of a lot. Like he was averaging like 19, 20 minutes. And that's partly because of Montour. But if they split the power play time, I'm still okay with Dunn. His peripherals is not that great for me.
Yeah.
Like Faulk is that's the one area where I think Faulk has him really beat.
Right.
Zellweger's the interesting one. I think Zellweger's really great hold right now, but a month from now, I don't know how the Ducks power play is going to look.
Right. Yeah, that is a fair point with them there. I was making the point, like at 5v5, the Ducks have kind of changed tack a little bit, and they've been playing this
They're
like
better.
the high chance for, high chance against kind of
Yeah.
5v5 play. And so obviously that's good for us in fantasy. We don't really care if they're getting scored on a lot as long as they're putting up some points. And that obviously favors Zellweger a little bit. But yeah, there could come a time for sure when the wheels fall off a little bit. They're definitely not one of the stronger teams in the league. So if they start to get scored on too much and it starts to go against them a little bit, do they try to clamp things down again defensively? And then Zellweger loses some of that potential. And like you said, does he actually maintain top power play usage all season long? That's up for debate as well. So yeah, at the moment, like these guys, none of these guys are like absolute must hold on your roster all season long with a bullet kind of decisions for me at this point. But that leads me to just kind of go with the guys that I think have the best chance to produce in like the next week or so, and then kind of let it unravel from there. Armin says Ottawa has one of the weakest opponents during my playoffs. If I'm confident I'll make it, would you swap UPL for Allmark? To me, that's looking too far ahead at this point in the
Yeah.
season. I think you got to get there first. So for myself, I'm not looking to make that move, especially for goaltenders who we all know in and of themselves are pretty variant. By the time you get there, UPL could be lights out and Allmark could be really floundering, or vice versa. I just don't want to make that prediction here on November 25th about what they're going to be doing come March. So that's where I'm at. I don't know if you got anything else there, Jason.
No, but I think it was interesting that they went with Anton Forsberg tonight.
Yes.
So, I mean, you're right. Like projecting this far out with goalies, especially, it's hard. I like Luukkonen personally more than Allmark,
Sure.
but I understand that the Sabres and Sens could fall off at any point
Yeah.
or get hot. Like
Yeah. It
possible to
could go
say.
both ways. Yeah. Michael says someone dropped Kreider in my league today, scooped him, and threw him on the IR. When he comes back to the lineup, should I drop Tippett, Nuge, or Nuke? These 3 are currently my worst players.
Wow, what a pickup!
Yeah, that's a great pickup. Probably it would be Tippett for me. I was just gonna see if he's got anything. He did pick up an assist in this game so far. The Flyers have 4 goals. He's got 1 assist, so it's not like he's gone off while I'm about to counsel you to drop him. But yeah, I think it would be Tippett for me. We do have Tippett on the list here, so we will talk about him in the metrics in a second. But Yeah, it's just a player who does get streaky, a lot of shot volume, but he's never been an efficient player. So, yeah, I think it's Tippett for me, unless you have like maybe it's Bangers Cats, and that might give me some pause just for the hits and shots combo that he does bring to the table. But I don't know. What's your thoughts, Jason?
I think it's Tippett for sure. I think
All right.
Nichushkin for sure you have to keep.
Yeah.
Nugent Hopkins, I know he's a power play merchant, but I'd keep him for sure. I think the Oilers still have room to grow.
Yeah.
Phillies, like they've improved a lot. They're kind of playing 500 right now, but this is where I'd put them at.
Right.
And if this was last season, I might think twice about Tippett, but with like Matt May Vichkov being there, I just don't think Tippett's their best option. He just gets pushed down a lot. And I think he's on the second power play unit right now, too.
Yeah.
So,
Yep. I agree there. Isaac says, sorry, joined late. We still liking Cozens rest of season. I haven't checked in on Dylan Cozens in a second. We could do that here. Dylan Cozens, 1 goal his last
he's
5.
yeah, he's up and down. Like when
Yeah.
Tage went out, I thought it was telling that they used Ryan McLeod on what as a
Mm-hmm.
top six rather than really leaning on Cousins.
Yeah.
Cousins is hard for me to figure out. Like he hits, he shoots, wins faceoffs, but the points just aren't coming. I feel like he might revert to the mean with his shooting percentage, but he
Yeah.
also strikes me as a guy who will never have a good shooting percentage. Like he just doesn't
Yeah.
seem like a good finisher to me.
Yeah. I think that's a pretty interesting point. And he's kind of had these seasons that have made it really difficult to tell what kind of shooter he might be. I
Yeah.
did before the season go back and kind of look at his junior seasons and how much he was converting there, just because I was looking at his shooting percentages over his years in the league. And so his rookie year, he comes in, he shoots 6.5% in 41 games. You kind of throw that out, rookie season, whatever,
Mhm.
right? Next
Yeah.
season, it's 8.1, so it's not that much better. Then he goes 14.7 in 2022-23, which was that year that everybody went off in Buffalo. Then comes back with 9% last year, and now this year it's down at 6.6%. So yeah, I do think he might just be one of these guys who is more of that like 9% shooter, 10% shooter.
Mhm.
And yeah, the shots are there, everything else is there, but maybe he's just never going to be, he's maybe in a little bit of that kind of Owen Tippett mold where he does get a fair amount of shots, and we like that about him, but he doesn't tend to convert all that much. And so that's the tough part. I will say, like, usually when I see these guys, they generate a lot of shots, but the scoring chances are kind of down. So it just kind of tells you that they're shooting from further away and just like throwing pucks on net whenever they step over the blue line, kind of thing.
Mhm.
And Cousins does have good individual scoring chance for numbers, so that part gives me some hope that he could get hot and at least get over the 10% mark. Like, give us something here. But yeah, it's definitely something that I'm looking at with Cousins, where before I thought maybe he would regress somewhere between the 9 and the 14.7 that he had the year before, and now I'm thinking it might be more towards the 9 side with how things have started this year. So I do like the player. I do like the shots and the hits, as you mentioned. The 33% IPP on the season so far should come up. That is something that he has done consistently the last couple of years. 65% IPP, 68% IPP. So you expect him to be back in that range again at some point throughout the season. So I do think that, yeah, you could expect him to do better on those fronts, but it is worth mentioning that he may not be a goal scorer so much despite the shot volume.
Yeah. I just want to add like he has to work really hard for his goals, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I remember back in junior, and he wasn't like a prolific scorer in junior by any means in the WHL, which tends to be like a tougher league to score in because you got a bunch of farm boys in there.
Yeah, yeah.
And the Lethbridge Hurricanes teams he played on were really good, but I do remember him being like one of the younger players, but they had a lot of overagers. So in junior, if you have a lot of overagers on your team, you tend to do quite well. So that was the team that had Kalen Addison,
Mm.
and we all know how he panned out. Or maybe he still has a chance. I don't know. But yeah, Cousins to me, interesting career so far, but to me a little lower upside, I should say.
Yeah, yeah, I'd agree there. The Tinkly Winkly man says, for Boldy, Kaprizov, and Jeep, their play as sharp as can be, but with talent so great, could they elevate for their line? Is there more yet to see? Wow, that was oddly poetic there. Wow. Yeah, so For myself, I think we're seeing probably as good as it's gonna be from these guys. I think Boldy maybe could get to that 90. Maybe in his best season in the league, he pushes 100 points. I think he could potentially hit that. Kaprizov, you're seeing obviously his ceiling and how electric he can be on a night-to-night basis. Jeek is definitely like a bit more of the passenger on that. He's a terrific player, don't get me wrong, but definitely he's not the guy who's single-handedly willing everybody around him to multi-point nights every single night the way that Kaprizov has been. So I think that that's kind of my take on the trio. There is there's a pretty clear hierarchy there. Kaprizov is one of the elite forwards, the elite point scorers in the league. Boldy is probably a tier down from that, but still on the rise as a young player in the league. And then Jeek is the guy that's the kind of the facilitator, wins the faceoff, gets in the corner, does all the right things, sits in front of the net and bangs home the rebounds. Really valuable player to have in that role, but definitely a little bit more of the third wheel than the primary guy on that line. How do you see it, Jason?
Same. I think Eriksson Ek strikes me more as like an ideal number 2 center. I think if you're rostering a center on that team for the future, is Marco Rossi, who has the higher offensive ceiling. Boldy's interesting to me. I think he can probably produce a lot more, like, and get to that 90, 100 point range, as you said, if he got a little more ice time. We saw him get 25 minutes when Kaprizov was out. I do wonder because that lineup to me isn't that deep, at least talent wise. So
Yeah.
if he wants to get to that point, he needs the ice time, but I don't know if he's going to get it.
Yeah, that is always a key point with all these players, and that's
Yeah.
why we monitor these lines and the ice time that these coaches give so much. I will say, like, Heinz has been pretty liberal with his top players. Obviously, Kaprizov is kind of in a category of his own in that regard. He gets as many minutes as he wants any single night. But I do think that Boldy is on his way to that status. Maybe there's a few things he's being asked to do to eventually end up in that same kind of territory in terms of the ice time, but I think he's on his way there, and that'll definitely elevate his potential as well. Michael said, also in my other league, Fiala was dropped, going to put in a waiver claim for him, but I either have to drop Peterka, Nelson, or Rust, leaning Nelson since the Islanders are in a hole. Which way would you go with that question, Jason? Dropping Rust, Nelson, or Peterka for Fiala?
The choice for me would be Nelson or Rust, and I'm actually leaning Rust.
Okay.
I think Brock Nelson's going through a tough stretch right now, but
For sure.
he just came off a 3-point game. I like the shot volume. I like the role that he plays. Rust is interesting. I'm just not very high on Pittsburgh, especially if he's not playing with Crosby. Depends on what kind of categories you have too.
Sure.
Rust is pretty good for hits and shots. I just don't know if he's going to convert a lot of that.
Yeah, that is the key part. Now, for what it's worth, Rust did get back on the Crosby line in practice today, just came out. So that is a point in his side, but definitely Nelson has had the better play as of late, better underlying numbers, about the same minutes, 19 plus minutes for both these guys, and Nelson has 4 points in his last 5, where Rust only has 2. I think they're comparable. If the center versus right wing designation for these guys does anything for you, then maybe that can be kind of a tie break for you. But I think you could drop either for Fiala, and I wouldn't feel too bad about it. All right, we had a good run of comments there, but we got to get back to the list. We only got through one player before we got into that. So let's get back to Slafkovsky here. 3 assists in his last 5 games here, 17 minutes average time on ice. The underlying metrics look real bad here. 328th in shots per 60, 219th individual scoring chances, 4 per 60. On-ice numbers are a little better, but not much. The best number is 100th in the league in on-ice scoring chances, 4 per 60 over the last 5 here. So that's obviously a tough spot to be. The forward lines at practice this morning were Slafkovsky on a second line with Kirby Dach and Joel Armia. That's a tough place to generate a lot of points if you are on the Montreal Canadiens at the moment. So what's your expectation for Slafkovsky? I guess let's look at the short term here, if that kind of lineup holds for the immediate short term, and then also over the course of the season, do you think he has a chance to kind of right the ship and start to fulfill some of that potential we started to see towards the end of last year?
I don't like him on the second line. I think
Yeah.
for any Habs player, you got to be with Suzuki and Caufield. Dak is interesting. He's a good playmaker, but doesn't produce a heck of a lot. Newhook struggled all season. And Slafkovsky, as a rookie, you're going to have these ups and downs. So immediately, I don't really think he has a lot of value. Long term, I definitely like it. For a guy who doesn't seem to convert a lot of his scoring chances, he needs to shoot the puck a lot more.
Yeah, that's been the toughest part, honestly, with Slavkovsky, is it really did seem last year when he was hot that he was starting to shoot more. He was starting
Yeah.
to generate more individually, like on his own. And so, yeah, the Habs obviously thought that was great. They signed him to the big deal, and maybe he's, he's still a young kid, like 20
Mm-hmm.
years old, 21 years old, trying to find his way in the league. And I do think he's got a bright future ahead of him, but yeah, it might not be this season that we get to see that from Slavkovsky. I 100% agree. Like, yeah, he's not going to get it done from the second line. That would be pretty shocking. So we're going to have to see him get some better deployment for him to really pop off at any point and really be worth what you probably had to pay for him to acquire him in your leagues. But I do want to also kind of put a pin in it and say, I think there could be something here still. And it may be another situation where, come the back half of the season, he really starts to find his game again and starts to elevate. And then maybe that sustains a little bit more over the course of his career. I think it's easy to forget how young these players are sometimes and how they haven't really had to deal with the ups and downs of an NHL season. And to be frank, in Montreal so far this year, it's been much more down than up. And every player deals with that a little bit differently. So
Yeah.
totally agreed there.
The only thing I'd add at the very end is that Patrick Laine should be back soon. So
Mm-hmm.
him going into the lineup, I wonder how that's going to affect everyone else.
For sure. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they decide to line things up. Yeah, in this practice, it looked like he was the one who was getting up on that line with Suzuki and Caufield. So that obviously be a really interesting spot for Line. And you would assume that he'd get on a top power play at some point. Yeah, it'll be interesting one way or another to see how Line fits into this lineup, and good to see him back on the ice and practicing in full. We did kind of talk about Tippett, so I'm not going to dig too deep here, but I will note a couple of things here. Down towards 15 minutes average time on ice in the last five. It's kind of getting the Tortorella downward bump at this moment versus the upward numbers they sometimes get. Like, Tortorella has been a little bit more vocal about Tippett than some other players in that he likes him, but Tippett has not really given him a good reason to play him. 277 shots per 60. The shot attempts are there, 47th in shot attempts per 60 over the last five, but not hitting the net and not getting to dangerous areas over the last little bit here. So, yeah, I'm not excited about Tippett at the moment. I definitely think he's a bit more fringy. I think you're right on when you're talking about Michkov kind of being that game breaker now and them not needing Tippett to, or trying to, pigeonhole Tippett into being that
Mm-hmm.
guy maybe, as they tried to do last year at times. So I do think that could potentially hold Tippett back a little bit because Michkov is obviously up for the task based on what he's been able to do so far.
Yeah. If you're talking about the Flyers and like wingers who can skate really fast and shoot the puck, they've got a couple of those, right? So,
Yep. Yep.
it's hard to stand out when you're like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a place where Tortorella decides on a night-to-night basis who's going to be fantasy relevant. And that's a tough place for us to roster anybody on a weekly basis. Cole Caufield did make the list here. He's got 2 goals, 5 points in his last 5, but under 16 minutes, which is an interesting piece there. 203rd shots per 60, 186th individual scoring chances for per 60. I've liked Cole Caufield for a long time, but it was because he was always looking absolutely elite in those chance generation metrics that I talk about so much. And yeah, that's kind of gone away. The points haven't gone away, but you got to wonder if if he can really sustain it with the lower chance generation and shot generation numbers. It's worth noting that some of that they did play with the lines, and he was down. I think it was Jake Evans and Alex Newhook on that second line with him, and so obviously that's a tough spot
Oof.
to work with if you're Cole Caufield. So maybe not all his fault, and obviously he did still get 5 points in the last five. So credit to him for that. Where are you at on Cole Caufield? Like on the season now, he's pacing for 49 goals, but only 66 points. So it's kind of been goals or bust kind of season so far for Cole Caufield. Where are you at on him rest of season? What kind of point pace would you project for him moving forward?
I'd probably put him on a 60-point pace, similar to what he did last season. So you mentioned 5 points in 5 games, but it comes kind of with an asterisk because 4 of those points came in 2 games with 2 points in each. And then there's another 4 game stretch where he didn't do much. What's concerning to me is the ice time, as you mentioned, but the shot volume's not there. But I wonder if Laine comes back, that it'll open it up for him a little more. Because if you're defending against the Habs, there's only really one player you need to worry about shooting the puck. That's Cole Caufield.
Yeah, that'll be interesting for sure. The Habs are just desperate for scoring threats on this lineup to try to ice two lines that can potentially scare some defenders on the other side. So hopefully Laine can provide a bit of that for them. I was pretty bullish on Caufield in my preseason projections. I had him for 40 goals, 77 points, but that was with 19 minutes, 45 seconds average time on ice, which was kind of what he was getting towards the end of last year, but he's not gotten that kind of treatment at any point so far this year. I'm not honestly entirely sure why. It's not like the guys down the lineup in Montreal are getting it done for them, so I'm not sure why they're kind of picking on Cole Caufield to demote him when he's clearly their biggest threat to score on any given play. But regardless, now you got to kind of reevaluate and say it does seem like a conscious choice to put him more in that 18-minute range than the 19, 20-minute range. And so that's a data point that you have to take into account at this point in the season.
I don't have the stats in front of me, but it would be interesting to see shot attempts for Caufield and how many actually hit the net or force a goalie to make a save. I think that would be interesting. I don't have it in front of me, but
yeah, so I guess you could look at some of these per 60 numbers. So 77th in shot attempts per 60 over the last five here, and 203rd in actual shots. So those are the ones that hit the net there.
yeah.
And then on the season, 71st in shot attempts and 117th in actual shots. So yeah, definitely a little
Either
bit
he's
lagging.
getting blocked, or he's missing a lot, or both, right?
Yeah. Let's move on to Connor Bedard, who's been a hot topic for all the wrong reasons as of late as well. Just 2 assists in the last 5, 19 minutes time on ice, so he's still getting deployed pretty well, but these are metrics that don't make any sense for a guy of Connor Bedard's caliber. 363rd in shots per 60, 347 individual scoring chances, 4 per 60, also in the 300s in the on-ice numbers. What is going on with Connor Bedard, Jason?
Well, Luke Richardson can't decide who to play with.
Yeah.
And honestly, I feel like sometimes there's too much line juggling going on. I do think Teravainen is a very limited player, and same with Tyler Bertuzzi. But I mean, some of these players that you think maybe he'll give him a lot more chances with, like Tyler Bertuzzi played with 20 minutes at 5-on-5. Taylor Hall only 45 minutes at 5-on-5 so far. I think it's tough to get into that rhythm. I actually think moving to the wing might help with Bedard, and if he gets like winger eligibility in fantasy, that's actually big. Yeah. Because relative to centers, he's just not very relative to center, he doesn't have a lot of value. But some of it's growing pain. Some of it's just like he's the centerpiece of that Hawks offense. And every team knows that if they can, lock down Bedard, they lock down the entire team.
Yeah. Yeah, that is the biggest problem that you see. Losing Seth Jones off the back end didn't help them at all either.
Very true.
Yeah, at least in terms of the offensive generation side of things. It's so hard to replace a guy who's eating 25 minutes a night and can actually play as a top pairing defenseman in the league. So that didn't help. I agree. They don't have anybody who's like really a true top line player to play with him, right? Like Bertuzzi has played that role at times and been serviceable, most notably back in Detroit, right? But as of late. Like even with the Leafs last year, it worked for stretches, but definitely didn't work for the entire season. What they thought might be a good pairing there with Matthews and Marner on that top line. It took a while for it to work, and then it worked, and then it didn't. Yeah, it was kind of up and down for Bertuzzi. But I mean, relative to the other players, Bertuzzi looks like an all-star that could be
Yeah.
playing with Connor Bedard there. So I would like to see them just kind of run out Bertuzzi, Bedard, Teravainen as like the best three offensive players and just stick them out there for the next like 10 games and say, we're going
Yeah.
to figure it out. You guys are it, and see what you can get done. Build that chemistry, give them time. Yeah, it could be that Richardson is feeling the heat a little bit at this point. He's been there for a while now, and they want to show some sort of advance. Obviously, they did make those two acquisitions that kind of signaled that they wanted to be a little bit more competitive this year, and it hasn't quite come true yet. So I can understand it a little bit from his point of view, but yeah, in terms of Connor Bedard's fantasy value, that's what I'd like to see is just give him the best possible line mates and quit playing around with it. Let him develop some chemistry. He's going to have to learn how to play through being the target every single night because that's not going away anytime soon. In terms of like, would I go out and try to acquire him? I'd like to see some sort of bounce back in the underlying numbers or a few goals to go in off of skates or something to give him a little bit of a spark here. But I do think that it's coming to the point where there are some managers out there hanging on to Bedard who might be willing to move off him
Hmm.
for pretty cheap. And I don't know if we're quite there yet because of the huge name brand value that he does hold. But I think we're trending in that direction. And I do want to have that in the back of my mind because I do think there will be a point somewhere in this season where Connor Bedard is the Connor Bedard that we were expecting at the beginning.
Just a
Uh,
final point
yeah.
on Bedard, actually. For a guy who's known for shooting the puck, so far, still early stage in his career, shooting percentage not like trending like an elite scorer. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean?
Yep.
So
It's a good point. Yeah, you expect that it'll get better, but to your
it
point, it
should,
hasn't
yeah,
been there so far.
yeah.
So, yeah, in terms of fantasy, you're still kind of projecting something that hasn't quite come true yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's hit a few comments here, and then we'll get back to it. Curious about Sergachev's numbers. Does he keep up the blocks? Thanks, guys. Blocks to me is like a combination team stat and player stat. So you kind of get an idea pretty quickly of what that might look like. And usually it's pretty sustainable over the course of a season. So I tend to think that blocks are pretty sustainable. Sergachev here, the last 5 games, couple goals, 3 points, 25 minutes a night, 144th in shots per 60, but 41st in individual scoring chances, 4 per 60. So he's at least getting to the dangerous areas a little bit there. 73rd on ice Corsi, 4 per 60, 38th on ice scoring chances, 4 per 60. On the season now, pacing for 20 goals, 55 points. That's with a 50% IPP. The shooting percentage is probably pretty high there. On ice shooting percentage might be a touch high. Yeah, I think he should live somewhere in this range. The goals, I think, will come down, but the assists might kind of even it out a bit, and he should live in this kind of 55-point range. What do you think, Jason?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. The one thing is, I think he can really keep up this pace because he's playing 25 minutes and Sean Durzee's not returning anytime soon, right? So
Right.
that's the big one.
Yep. I agree with that. Curious if Dorofiev is still a hold, and can we do Vilardi? Yeah, as noted here in the chat, Dorofiev did score in this game here again on the power play. Yeah, Dorofiev still looks pretty good under the hood. He's fallen off a little bit over the last few games. We did talk about him, Blake and I did, on the show that came out yesterday. But yeah, the underlying numbers are still looking fine. 17 and a half minutes is fine. I'd say he's probably like just a step above streamer level for me at the moment in kind of a standard 12 team format. It's a player that I'm trying to hang on to at the moment. How do you feel, Jason? You put him in that range, or would you consider him just in a streamer territory?
I agree with you. As long as he's playing on the top power play, I think he has
Mm-hmm.
value. I do like the shot volume. That's I think the one that surprised most um, is the consistent shot volume.
Yeah. Yeah, he's been pretty good. And honestly, he's been pretty good throughout his young career so far. It's been small
Yes.
sample sizes, so you never want to read too much into that. But the fact that he's been able to sustain it and sustain it higher up the lineup with more minutes is a really good sign for a young player like that. Vilardi was requested, so we'll do him briefly here as well. A goal and an assist, 2 points his last five, 17 and a half minutes average time on ice. Not shooting. The on ice numbers look good because he's playing with really good players there, but it does seem like Vilardi has taken a step backwards individually versus where he was at last year when he was playing. He obviously dealt with injury last year as well. What's your temperature on Vilardi, Jason? Do you think that this is a player that's worth holding? Is he in that streamer range? Maybe rank him versus Dorofiev here too.
I'd have him ahead of Dorofeyev if only because Vilardi's playing on that Scheifele line that's been so good, and the Jets are so good right now. Vilardi's like a really interesting player. Like I can't get a good hold on him because he's never really played a full season. I
Yeah,
do think he's overheating, but if you look at his career, like he doesn't shoot the puck a lot, but he converts a lot of those chances.
yeah,
And for a guy who's an all-around player and in some ways a playmaker, not a lot of assists,
yeah,
which
yeah. It
is
is
just
an
like kind of
interesting thing.
surprising, right?
Yeah, yeah, it is kind of surprising for sure. Yeah, I don't really know what to make of the underlying stats being so bad for Velarde this year so far. I tend to think it'll even out a bit, but I think, yeah, he's definitely the third wheel on that. Like he's on a
Mhm.
31 goal, 62-point pace. I think maybe like the IPP isn't like sky high or anything, but the on ice shooting percentage is pretty high. His
Yep.
individual shooting percentage is pretty high. I think this is probably the best case scenario for him is like a 31 goal, 62-point pace. Like maybe he sustains the goals, but the assists drop off a little bit. He seems to be a bit more of like the
He's
stand
a
in front of the
finisher.
net. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of the Zach
Um,
Hyman light kind of situation.
yeah.
Yeah.
The
That's
one
kind of where I'm at.
the one thing I want to point out, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I seem to remember that the Velarde Connor Scheifele line actually doesn't have great possession metrics.
Yeah, I had heard that somewhere as well, at least early in the season. I'm not sure if it's gotten better or gotten worse, but I do remember that being a talking point at some point
Yeah.
earlier on. But it also feels like they're like, I mean, everything, it's easy to say when things have been going so well for you, but it does
Yeah.
seem like they've been pretty married to this current lineup setup. And
Yeah.
so, until they're given a reason to change, you feel pretty confident that it's not going to. That being said, like if Velarde did come off that line or off the top power play, that would drastically change the expectation for him moving forward because it does feel like he is kind of the third wheel in all
Yeah.
those situations.
And it's a line where, like, even if they don't get outshot, they're going to outscore because Connor's a great shooter. Scheifele
Mhm.
converts a ton of his chances.
Yes,
So it's just a very efficient line. They don't have to control possession to be good.
it's true. Michael says, just in general, how you guys feeling all the Leafs this season? Early, do you feel like this could be a year where the Leafs can make a deep playoff run with their play lately? I will never bet on the Leafs to make a deep playoff run. I've been hurt too many times before, and I refuse to do so again. Yeah, that's my stance, and I'm sticking to it. I mean, in terms of how the team is playing, and for fantasy, kind of a fantasy take here, I do think that it's been a good thing to get a refresh with the coach there, to get a new voice in the room and kind of remotivate in a way. Not that they were going to be bad if Sheldon Keefe had come back for another year, but I do think it's overall positive and yeah, it gives me a little bit more confidence that they'll not get complacent throughout the season, I guess, in a way where they had done that at times in previous years. So I think that's my take on the Leafs at this point. I'm definitely not willing to make any playoff predictions yet.
What do you determine? What do you define as a deep playoff run? Is that like 2 rounds, 3 rounds?
Yeah, that's true. For the Leafs, it feels like if you get out of the first round,
I
that's
know,
about
like
as deep
that's
as it
pretty
can
deep
possibly
for
go.
the Leafs. Yeah.
Yeah. It's you have to laugh or else you cry with the Leafs. Stonk says Robertson or or a bag of Canadian Tire pucks, a 20 pack. Yeah, Jason Robertson has not been great so far. He did have a good night the other night. I don't think he's gotten on the score sheet. Dallas is up 3-2 on Carolina as we're recording this, and I'm not seeing anything for Jason Robertson. No,
No, it's that Sagan line again.
again. Yeah, what do you make of that, Jason? How long can Marchment and Sagan keep this thing going, and Duchesne?
I actually think they can keep it all season. The problem is Sagan's not going to play 82 games, right? Like he's taken such a toll on his body that he's just going to have to do like a load management thing. But Duchesne has obviously found a great home. Mason Marchment's like one guy I feel like that could drop off the most. But Sagan, if you have the space to stream him, he's a top tier streamer, like point per game type stuff. I just think they're the only line that's really going right now. For a league that likes to play fast, I feel like this is part of Jason Robertson's problem, is that he's not very fast.
Yep. Yeah, it's very true. It's an interesting situation. I do think, like, over the course of a season, it's easy to forget how we're only one quarter of the way into the
I know,
season
right?
so far. It
Early.
feels like it's been happening for a while already, and we already know everything that there is to know about this season. It's easy to get in that mindset that, how things have gone so far is exactly how it's going to go for the rest of the year. So I do think that over the course of the year, things will even out a little bit there. Robertson has been bad. There's no two ways about that. But I do think that, yeah, he had like the injury kept him out of all of training camp, and then maybe this is totally just conjecture on my part. Maybe he tried to rush back to make sure he was in for opening night kind of situation, and maybe wasn't 100% ready to go, and that's kind of lingered throughout the season. Totally conjecture on my part, but it would be understandable and would, give you some idea why things maybe haven't gone his way so far this season. That being said, I do think this is a player who's going to do better than he has so far. It feels like he can't do worse anyway.
As an aside, what do you think is Robertson's ceiling?
Well, I think we've seen the ceiling, right, with that 100+ point season.
But do you think that's an anomaly? I think that's the anomaly. I don't know
Oh,
if
for
it's going to get
sure.
close.
Yeah, for sure that's an anomaly. I mean, you would take a season where he gets that like 20-minute treatment, right? And I just don't think that's a scenario that's possible in this iteration of the Dallas Stars. Like, if you transplant him onto a different team with a different philosophy, then maybe it is, and maybe he could get back there. But I don't think you're seeing 100+ points out of Robertson in the current version of the Dallas Stars. And I don't think they're letting him go anytime soon, right?
No.
So he's going to be there, and it's probably going to be this kind of situation where he's in good years he's going to be efficient and he's going to be point per game plus, but I don't think you're ever touching 100 as long as he's in Dallas.
Same. 300 shots too that year.
Yeah, that was wild.
Yeah. Anecdotally, have you found that the shots per player have kind of come down a little bit? Like last year we had so many 300 shot guys, but this year not so much.
Yeah, definitely. There's less shot volume. I forget where I read it, but there was an article I read that was pretty interesting, and it did seem like coaches have made like a concerted move towards like legit scoring chances versus just pucks on net.
Yep.
Over the last number of years, the trend has gone more and more and more that way, and you see it in goaltender save percentages coming down over the last number of years. And so I think that does play in here where they're not so much worried about the shot meter at the end of the game.
Mhm.
They're more worried about, are we actually generating chances in close? Are we getting to the high danger scoring areas? And they're kind of just shifting that focus. And so
Yep.
I do think that's having a bit of a dampening effect on just total shot volume. Mitch Marner was requested here. We did talk about Mitch Marner, Blake and I did, on the flagship show, so you can check that out. Obviously, big points here with Matthews away 22 minutes a night. The individual stats never look good with Mitch Marner. He is a pass-first player. That's just who he is. But 31st in on-ice scoring chances, 4/60. He's been doing that for sure. I think Marner had him projected right at 100 points at the start of the season. Right now, I think he's on pace for 109. 31 goals, 109 points. I think that's like relatively within the wheelhouse, somewhere 100, 105 points. Wouldn't be shocking to me. Where do you see Marner for rest of the season, Jason?
That's about where I'd have him. He's a top tier fantasy player. Just points though, not nothing.
Yeah, it doesn't add much outside of that, that's for sure. All right, back to the list, and we'll kind of blast through here now. Kent Johnson, who you mentioned you had some affinity for a little bit earlier there, obviously just the 2 games back here so far, but he's put up 4 points. Hard to really read too much into the metrics with only 2 games to draw from here, but talk to me about Johnson and why he's piqued your interest.
First of all, I think Dean Evison loves him. The big thing for me is his role and the ice time.
Yeah.
So I think he was like 13 minutes, I think, in the season opener or something like that. So 18 minutes. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. And then he played 21 minutes the next two games. And I was like, okay, we're
Yeah.
on to something here. And he's always had that potential. And then last season he kind of fell back a little bit in his development, kind of like Connor McMichael, who like broke into the league a little too young, maybe had to go into the minors and ply his game. And I feel like I can see the same with Kent Johnson. It helps that the Jackets have some talent and Werenski's healthy and they can score goals. But I just like the way the Ken Johnson's play is trending. He's not going to keep up this pace, whatever his pace is right now. It's like 100 something points. But I think if he ends up with like a 60-point pace for the rest of the season, I think that's pretty darn good.
Yeah, I do think that's possible. The one thing that I've really appreciated about Dean Evison coming to Columbus is that he's been like, oh, you're a good player, you can have minutes. And it's not always been the case in Columbus, where they've just kind of like rolled guys and you're like, really, did we have to give this fourth line guy 12 minutes as well? So
like throughout their history, they've just never been able, like even in peak Rick Nash era, they haven't been really good at scoring. Now all of a sudden they got like some really talented players, right? So
yeah, and you're starting to see, maybe it was a little bit of, all these things coming together at the same time, that it's a young team as well, right?
Yeah.
So maybe the guys all maturing at the same time. It's all hitting at the same time. But definitely, I think Evison has had a huge positive effect on that squad as well. Vincent Trocheck, another player that we talked about, Blake and I did, but just one goal his last 20 and a half minutes average time on ice. Interesting news out of New York today, where Elliot Friedman tweets out, kind of out of the blue, that the Rangers are considering trading Kreider and Trouba. Did you see this, Jason?
Yes, I did. That was a big. Kreider's the big one. Trouba I kind of get,
right.
but Kreider's the big one because he's always been the heart and soul type of player. But like the Rangers have been caved in at 5-on-5 really hard this year. Past two seasons, they've won like the league trophy and whatnot, but they were kind of like middle of the pack. Now it's like it's kind of concerning, and I also wonder if Mika Zibanejad struggling has impacted Trocheck's play.
Yeah, it's a weird spot, right? Like they also like played around with the lines a bunch, so it wasn't the Trocheck Lafreniere Panarin line that was so good for pretty much all of last year. That wasn't the case anymore. They have gone with that again now, most recently. So that's a good spot. But yeah, it's an interesting place. I think as long as Trocheck is getting 20 plus minutes, I'm not going to be too concerned.
Yeah, he does other stuff too, right? So
exactly, yeah. So I'm not too concerned on the whole on the season. Like a 38% IPP, that's going to come up. 8.7% shooting percentage, that's going to come up. So there are some definite signs for positive regression there for Trocheck. But the fact that they did move him off that line with Panarin, like I think he has to be attached to Panarin for him to really hit his ceiling, right? You could probably say that about anybody on the Rangers, to be honest, but for Trocheck, it especially rings true for me. So yeah, the fact that they were willing to move him off that line is a little bit concerning, where he was pretty much stapled to him all of last year. But in the end, I'm not panicking on Trocheck just yet.
No. I've had a lot of Trocheck questions too. I'd still hold.
Yeah. Jake Guentzel, he's got 5 points his last 5. I mean, Tampa's winning 8-2 now.
Is it 8-2 now? Oh my god.
It's 8-2, and Guentzel's got a couple goals. Brandon Hagel has 5 assists, so shout out Brandon Hagel. That's a night.
Jurgensen's got on the board. Oh my god.
That's when you know it's a bad night.
I know.
But most interesting, honestly, to me with Jake Guentzel is the amount of ice time he's been getting lately. 21 plus minutes here as of late, and over 20 minutes on the season. And honestly, like I think he can do better than this 30 goal, 78 point pace he's been on. That was kind of my worry about Guentzel is, it's a new team. You never know exactly how that's going to go. You figure just because he's a good player, he's going to play with Kucherov and Point a lot. They're obviously very good players, that they'll figure it out. But would he figure it out this fast? And it does kind of seem like he's reached like the solid level, and now it feels like he could elevate to the next level, especially if he's going to get 21 minutes a night. So what's your take on Guentzel? Do you think he's got ceiling beyond this 78 point pace he's on currently?
I don't know. I did think coming into season that maybe he'll get 90, outside chance of 100, just because of what you said, playing with a really top tier talent.
Mm-hmm.
But he's actually like a really good two-way player. And maybe because Point and Kucherov are still scoring a lot, he's kind of sacrificed a little bit of his offense. So like his floor is point per game, which is incredible, right?
Yeah.
And maybe he can get to 90 or 100 at some point, but I feel like this is kind of it. Higher than 78, but no, not much higher than that, in my opinion.
Yeah, that is where I had him as a projection to start the season, was right around that point per game mark. But I
Mm-hmm.
was being, consciously just a little bit cautious that it might not
Yeah.
work out perfectly. I had him at 19 minutes 45 seconds average time on ice. So yeah, if he sustains at 21 minutes, then yeah, he gets a little bit of a bump from there, maybe into like the 85 to 90 point range, in kind of like a baseline expectation. So I do think that there could be some room to grow, but we haven't seen it quite yet. But definitely, if you're getting 21 minutes alongside Kucherov and Point, there's not many better places to be
Yeah.
if you're a winger in the NHL.
I mean, he did average like 20 minutes with the Pens for the longest time, right? Granted,
Mm-hmm.
it was the Pens, but
Yep. Yeah, he had the Crosby exposure, but then obviously a bit of a revolving door on the other side. Rust
yeah,
was a good line mate when he was healthy, but he obviously wasn't healthy for a lot of that time
yeah.
either. So, yeah, this is probably the best consistent line that he's been a part of at any point in his career between Point and Kucherov, at least in terms of actually putting points on the board. Stonks was letting us know they put in Annunen, put Georgiev in, got pulled, Annunen back in, let in 2 goals on 2 shots. That is the Avalanche goaltending experience
Where's
for you.
Kapel Kakinen?
Yeah, they got to figure something out here. There's some guy in the AHL who's definitely better than what they've been able to
Oh
get
my
out of their
god.
goaltenders. Yikes. That is rough.
Yeah, never mind Carolina. Like with
Yeah, the
Trocheck
Avs.
injured, like the Avs need a goalie bad.
Yeah. Zach Hyman here. Speaking of guys who play in good spots, obviously been injured. I'm gonna say the same thing I've said all season. I'm not really worried about Zach Hyman. The underlying metrics look really good. Still 20th in individual scoring chances, 4/60, 6th in on ice Corsi, 4/60, 5th on ice scoring chances, 4/60. He's been wildly snake bitten. I don't think that lasts over the course of a season. I'm pretty confident that Hyman does some good things for you once again. What's your take, Jason?
Same. I'm not too worried. I don't like coming into the season. I didn't think he was going to score 50 again,
Right.
but I'm sure he'll end up around with 30 something.
Yeah. Carter Verhaeghe, the next one there, he's had really good underlying metrics on the season, but it hasn't quite come to fruition. He's shooting just 6.7% on the season, 19 goal, 55 point pace here. 17 and a half minutes over the last 5, just a couple points there. Last game he was playing with Bennett and Kachuk. I did see something somewhere, and I can't find it back now, but there was something about him coming off the top power play and Bennett going in there. I don't know if that's sustained or not, to be honest with you. So I'd have to get some updates on that to be sure. What's your take on Verhaeghe? I've been saying he's a buy low for the last number of weeks here,
Mm-hmm.
but if he's off the top power play, that does change the equation a little bit, right?
Yeah, so Verhaeghe's actually moved on to the second power play with Lundell, Rodriguez,
There it is.
and Balinskis, who is like a weird fantasy player.
Yeah.
But we won't talk about him. I like Verhaeghe for the reasons you pointed out. What's concerning to me though is like he's a big minus this year. I'm not quite sure why,
Mm-hmm.
because the Panthers are still good. I think the points will come. Of the players you have on that list, other than maybe Meier and Johnson, he's the one that really intrigues me most as a guy
Okay.
you can probably buy low.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I had a pretty interesting projection on him at the start of the season. I thought that he could potentially flirt with 40 goals.
Oh,
Obviously,
for sure. Yeah. One day
yeah.
he will. He's done it
Yeah.
before, right? So
Yeah. Yeah, I had him actually projected at 40.6 goals. I think it'll be tough for him to get there with the start that he's had this year, but as a pace rest of season, I still think that's possible. Probably needs power play one to really bring that home, but that could change, as soon as next game as well. They will move some things around there. Um, Yeah, I tend to agree. I'm still in on Verhaeghe, the player. I think he's a good buy low candidate at the moment,
Mhm.
even if he doesn't hit my projection and get to that 40 goal mark, or even as a pace for the rest of this season. I still think he's like a near lock for a 70-point pace, and will be probably well worth what you'd have to pay to acquire him at this point. Moving on to the Toronto tandem here, Joseph Wall, Anthony Stolars. Yeah, it's been an interesting spot. They've kind of gone back and forth. Stolars has been terrific, but Wall has actually been pretty good as well. He had the shutout, and then they went back to him, and he won again against Utah. Utah was, I watched a fair bit of that game, and Utah was not playing their best hockey, having played the night before. So maybe take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. But yeah, what do you make of this? I mean, Stolarz has 927 on the season, and all the Leafs fans were like, "Oh, we finally found our goalie." But I mean, Woll has a 921, so both of these guys playing well right now. The problem is, like, can you really trust either of them to be a guy who's going to get you two starts in any given week with how they're kind of going back and forth between these two guys, right?
Yeah, I think this is a rotation. I think the issue with this rotation or this tandem isn't the regular season, it's the playoffs. But thank God fantasy hockey doesn't really count in the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
I think I don't think we should read too much into Wool getting two straight starts because I think they want to start Solars against the Panthers, against
Yeah,
his former team. So I do think they'll go back to the rotation. They're both really good goalies. I remember Mike Amato, who does the Sleepers and Keepers podcast with me, we both said Wool, when healthy, has looked fantastic. Like he should be the number one over Samsonov. Solars was great. He's been better than expected. It's just tough in fantasy because I feel like you want to roster both. But
yeah.
if you have one of them, even you shouldn't give them up. Even though the starts are sparse, they're going to be quality starts.
Yeah, yeah, I tend to agree there. It's just, yeah, probably better in cats leagues, right? Where you're
Yes.
trying to get
Yeah.
the rate stats up, and they're a good bet for a win when they're in, because obviously Toronto's a pretty good team. But yeah, in terms of will you get the volume on any given week, maybe not the safest bet that you can make
Yeah.
for your squad. So yeah, if I had either of them, honestly, I would be looking at seeing if I could trade, and maybe theoretically down tier to a player, to a different goaltender with maybe a little more volume, but somebody that doesn't quite have the pedigree or the name brand attached with being a Toronto goaltender. See if there's something like that out there, and if you can pick up an upgrade at a skater position along with that. That's something I've done in the past when I've had a goalie that's running hot, and I've almost always felt really good about that a month later. So
Yeah.
that is something I've tried to do.
Yeah. In any
Uh,
trade, you're swapping quality for quantity.
yeah. Eric Carlson on the list here. What do we say about Eric Carlson? Right, 2 assists his last 24 minutes. The underlying metrics still looking pretty good. He's generating chances. On ice numbers look good, but obviously Pittsburgh is just an absolute tire fire at this point.
Yeah.
I don't know how Mike Sullivan still has a job at this point in the season. Um, it really does seem like it's just not going to end well there. So on the season, he's pacing for 7 goals, 43 points. Yeah, like I said, the metrics all look good, but they looked pretty good last year, and last year was a disappointment for Karlsson as well. What's your temperature on Eric Karlsson at this point, Jason? Should we expect him to bounce back at least to like a 55-point range, or what do you think?
I mean, it could, right? Like one hot week and he's back on pace for 50, 60, right? But I feel
Yeah,
like that's the max. Anytime you're sharing the ice on the power play, Malkin and Sid, you're going to score points.
yep,
But that's a ceiling. We're not going to see point per game. We're not going to see a good plus minus. We're not going to see good peripherals.
yeah,
And it's just his game. The Penguins games are hard to watch right now just because they look awful.
yep. Yeah, I tend to agree with that. Um,
He's the
yeah,
rare, like, sorry, he's the rare, like, player who's actually better in fantasy now than in real life.
yeah, it's true.
Like, he's like the anti Miro Heiskanen right now.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely true. But also, like, not a guy who gives you much in the peripheral
Yeah,
categories, right? Like, he
right.
doesn't hit at all, barely blocks, so he's not doing much of that for you, and that hurts in those leagues that value those categories as well. Back to the comments. G Horn, what's up, Nate? Nick Katz banger with Pims. Would you trade McKinnon, McMichael, and Zellweger for Trocheck, Thompson, Makar?
Whoa.
That is a blockbuster if I've ever seen one. Or McKinnon and Hyman for Matthews and Pasternak. Oh my goodness. Those are big, big trades. I think I would take Matthews and Pasternak over McKinnon and Hyman.
Same.
Then on the McKinnon, basically it's McKinnon versus Makar, and then McMichael Zellweger versus Trocheck Thompson. Is the gap from McKinnon to Makar enough to to give up Thompson and Trocheck? I think I would lean on the Thompson side there, but I'm not confident about that. McKinnon has just been unreal once again to start this year. What do you think there, Jason?
Yeah, so I kind of read it the other way. I'd say the gap between Makar and Zellweger is so huge that McMichael doesn't make up for the rest. So
Right.
I'm with you. I think McKinnon's slowed down a little bit, but
Yep.
like he's not going to slow down for very long. He plays at one speed and it's like 1,000 times.
Yep. Yep.
But I do, if we're factoring position like into this, Makar as a top D is like top tier, right? Like him and Hughes are in a category of their own. So I might lean that way. That's tough. These blockbusters are tough.
Yeah, you never feel too comfortable at the end of
I
it,
know,
right?
right?
Because you're dealing good players.
Yeah. But I think I would take that Trocheck, Thompson, Makar side.
Yeah.
And then the McKinnon or the Matthews and Pasternak side.
Yeah. I think I end up in that camp as well there. Another question. What about Crosby? How are his metrics in relation to goals, assists, power play points? Crosby has been kind of just doing Crosby things for the most part on the season.
The problem is the rest of his team, not Crosby.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that has been the issue so far. He's got 4 points the last 5. Underlying metrics, the on ice metrics look really good. 20 minutes a night. It's
look at that CF rank.
Yeah,
Crosby per 60 rank.
Yeah, really good stuff in the on ice numbers for Crosby as per usual. Yeah, it's really just about how much is the team going to hold him back, really, for fantasy at this point. Like he's on a 75-point pace, 9% on ice shooting percentage. That should be more like an 11-12 range in a typical year for Crosby. So you do think that he should get something back there. But yeah, can you really rely on the Pens to boost that up, as we talked about with Karlsson as well? So that's where we're at with Crosby. I think he deserves better, but will he get better is kind of a different conversation altogether.
Yeah, I'd probably take the over on the 75 though.
Yeah, I think I would as well, but it's a question of how much more. I think at this point, can you really be confident in? Yeah,
that on ice shooting percentage is on the lower side for sure.
For sure. We already talked about Dorofiev, Horvat, Nugent Hopkins. They've already come up, but we haven't talked about Laferriere yet. He's got nothing in his last 5 games here. Still throwing pucks at the net, 60.5 minutes. That's not too bad. Another member of that top 9 in LA that we talked about with Fiala. Obviously, he's scored some goals so far this year, maintaining a spot on the top power play unit. The 19.2% shooting percentage is going to come down for sure. But what's your temperature on Laferriere now after, we've seen the hot start, it's leveled off here. What do you think the rest of season looks like?
So in a 16-team league or deeper, I'd probably just hang on to him just until I find something new. But in 12-team league, or anything less than that, he's a streamer to me now.
Yeah.
I don't feel comfortable holding him.
Yeah. I did let him go in a 12-team league where I had picked him up earlier on when he was doing so well. And I haven't been too sad about the lack of results lately. Giorn says, "Oh, let's go. Thanks, boys. Best part of Mondays. Appreciate you stopping by and asking the questions." That was the last one, Jason. We made it through the list. It was a bit of a marathon to get here. We had lots of interactions, so thanks everybody for joining in with the comments. We can maybe go and watch the Tampa Bay Lightning try to get to double digits here on the Colorado Avalanche with the rest of our evening.
Actually, the Knights just tied it up 4-4 against the Flyers.
Ooh.
And it's 4-3 now. Kane's up 1 with 6 minutes to go on the Stars.
All right, there's a few good games out there. All right, we got to get you out of here, Jason, so you can watch some
Okay.
hockey.
Okay.
But thanks for coming on. This has been awesome. It's good to have another voice instead of just myself droning on and on. So appreciate you coming on to do that. Why don't you tell the people where they can find all your good work? There's too many things I couldn't even list them if I started. So you do the honors.
Okay, thanks. Well, okay, so thank you for having me on. It's always great to hear your silky smooth voice on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. I'm on Twitter or X and Blue Sky, Jason Chen 16. I have a podcast with Mike Amato, who I mentioned earlier, comes out every Monday at 8 a.m. On Spotify and Apple and wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to find my work, myself and my co-editor, Jan Levine, we're at thehockeynews.com/NHL/fantasy. So every day we publish waiver wire articles for players and goalies who are under 50% roster in Yahoo leagues that you might want to stream. Every Monday, I have a primer that gets published. That's published Sunday nights, and I go through the schedule for the upcoming week and some players that you might want to add long term or medium term or short term. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty responsive, so if you send me a question, I'm happy to respond and provide whatever advice I can give. But yeah.
All right. Yeah, definitely go check out everything that Jason said too. I was just listening actually to Sleepers and Keepers before on my commute home today. I was
Nice.
listening
Thanks.
to Sleepers and Keepers. So I appreciate what you and Michael bring there. I've had Michael on the show before as well, and Blake has as well. I know he's had you on as well.
Yes. Shout out to Blake. Yes.
Yeah. Wouldn't be an episode if we didn't find Blake inserting himself into this somehow. So anyway, I think that's going to be all that we got for the episode. So hopefully it brought our listeners some value, helped them get a little bit better at fantasy hockey today. All these advanced stats you see on the screen and heard us talking about today come from Natural Stat Trick. Many thanks to the band They're There for supplying the music for the podcast. Be sure to check out their Spotify as well. Thanks again to Jason Chen for joining me on this marathon journey. But that's it, folks. Much love.